going through that stage in life with a son where he is picking up lingo, and it's a little frightening. Some of you will smile because you've gone through or are going through the same thing with your own children. But Chris was a little flabbergasted and came down a little bit aghast and smiling the other day when David said to her, "Mom, let's go to bed and make out." Now, when a child does that, you immediately flash in your own mind saying, what does the child mean by that? So there are a couple of things you do when they ask the unanswerable questions. And instead of panicking, she said, "What do you mean by make out?" He said, "Oh, mess around and tickle." Thank God he's still only 9. There are other things which are a little more difficult. "Dad," he said, "what do they mean by indecent exposure?" Now that one is a tough one. I also asked him, "Why do you ask that question?" And he had been watching on television and saw that ad for Red Fox where he's talking about his sister-in-law and she should be arrested because of her face for indecent exposure in 5 continents. And that gave me a chance to talk about that indecent exposure is revealing something in public that probably shouldn't be revealed, like her, quote, ugly face. And he understood that, and I got off and went and walked away. Now, other things you do when your kids ask questions like that is you send them to the dictionary, partly because it's fun to work with and have them learn to use words and look them up, and partly because it's a better way to get a good definition. The question came up on Monday morning with the eclipse of the sun. "Dad, what is an eclipse, and what is meant by it?" Well, as I was meditating upon and thinking about what was going to happen on this Sunday morning, and I thank Ruth Helpert on Tuesday morning who gave us the title, The Eclipses of Life, I thought it would be rather interesting to take a look at what is meant by an eclipse. And having looked it up in the dictionary, found there are 2 or 3 meanings which I think will be helpful to us in this conversation of the morning. The eclipse comes from a Greek word, kleipsis. Not klepto. Klepto is a kleptomaniac, stealing. But kleipsis, a failing. And ultimately, an eclipse is a failure primarily of light to get through. It's that simple. But look at the things. There's an overshadowing, a loss of brilliance or splendor, a blocking out of the sun by the moon. I try to imagine how many hundreds and thousands of years ago, as the eclipse would be coming around its regular way, what would have happened at that point? Can you imagine the stock terror and fear of people who do not understand what was happening with the great unknown where the sun itself suddenly disappeared? How fearful that might have been and must have been. For as I watched on the television screen and saw Portland, that large city, fade into blackness, and then the automatic lights coming on as the sun itself seemed to disappear from the world. I won't pause to reflect much upon the idea that most of us have a great fear of the unknown. I'm constantly amazed at how many times we are in situations which are far more dangerous than others, but because they're familiar, we accept them. It's the unfamiliar that terrorizes us, not the danger that might be found there. And so one can imagine tribes and people not yet civilized, not yet understanding science in any manner, shape, or form, being terrorized by the sudden disappearance of the sun. But as I try to understand and visualize and draw from some things there, I also recognize that not only would they have been terrorized from the disappearance of the sun, which was a relatively short period of time, there would have been lasting terror. The terror of blindness, because while some would obviously be so frightened they would look away, there are always those who stare. And what would have happened to the hundreds of people who, not knowing, stared at this phenomenon and lost their sight temporarily or permanently? One can imagine their stories being handed down and the terror growing about what happened when the sun is blocked out and how by watching it you are robbed of your sight And one can see the storytellers talking about the sun sucking out the vision and the light from the eyes, and blindness occurring. And the next time around, there would be those who, remembering those stories, would not look, and there would be those who would dare to look. For strange as it is, even in today's world, there are people who are going blind, looking at something they have been warned about and told about and hollered at and shown to be dangerous, but we still do it. Well, the fear is part of it. But as I reflected on the whole concept of the eclipse, very briefly, I thought of these things. Life is often eclipsed by an overshadowing. There is not an individual who in a family hasn't sometime or another had a member of that family overshadow them, an older or younger brother, an older or younger sister. Which one of us has not suffered at some time in our life the ability to do something and do it well and then suddenly be overshadowed by somebody that we admire and feel close to who makes it look so easy that we feel foolish? And feeling foolish, angry that something which is ours and our hold and that something that we're holding on to is overshadowed by another. How many times do you see somebody who you don't think is going to accomplish something and they do? And how frightening almost and angry that makes us, that our prediction about what's going to happen doesn't happen. Am I right? We're almost more angry by the accomplishments of those we chose not to have accomplishments than we are by the failures of others. How many times have we tried to stimulate our own families, our own children, our own friends, our own congregation, our employees, and all those with whom we have opportunity of meeting to accomplish something, and then when they accomplish maybe not 100%, but 70 or 80%, instead of recognizing that a growth has come, and that a child is making progress and understanding of what's going on, how many times do we bat them down and say, well, you really didn't make it all the way. It was a good try, but. Think in your own life the number of times that's happened to you, and the anger that you knew that you had growing to do and a long way to go, but you were slapped down before you had a chance, and there was no appreciation even of the effort. I think you begin to understand the overshadowing. We play a dangerous game in life. We do it in our own verbal lives. Cocktail parties have it. It's not too serious there, but it's called one-upmanship. It's a story that says, I don't believe in myself very much, so I've got to do everything I can to build myself in your eyes. Therefore, no matter what you say or do, I got one better. I've got one better than you. You've been to 5 countries, I've been to 6. You've been to college, I got a master's. Always one better. You've got a good joke, I've got a better joke. And at cocktail parties, perhaps that's not too serious, but when life begins to build with that kind of competitiveness, what happens? What happens when children are raised so that 2 or 3 or 4 in the family are constantly challenged not to achieve what they themselves can achieve, but to achieve basically what somebody else sets up as a goal? What happens when parents play one child off against another, so that there's never a feeling of accomplishment, but always a feeling of being less than best? What happens when we create in children's minds that they do not have a good wholesomeness, but we're always for their sake pointing out the evil, the bad, the failures? In times like that, because of our position as parents, as employers, as powerful people, as friends, as whatever, we are eclipsing lives. We are not allowing the full opening of the life to come through, but we're overshadowing. And the overshadowing is a burden. And it's a burden which some of us never able to throw off, no matter what. Well, those were some thoughts on the concepts of the obscuring or the overshadowing aspect of the eclipse in life. I think they are failings when we do this, because I think it's a failure to recognize human potential and to go. The second definition is loss of brilliance or splendor, and this is an age which seeks to understand that and has a tremendous problem with it. The now generation, the Pepsi generation, the generation which says there's no way that you can, quote, grow old, unquote, gracefully. You have to be now, young, swinging, moving. Doesn't matter. What's happened to the idea that as I grow older, I recognize the fact that I must slow down? That it's not foolish to be slower. It's indeed wise. That perhaps it's foolish to be fast, constantly moving, the jet age. There's a time of reflection and of growth. And that if it takes a little longer for me to walk the block, I'm not an old fogey. I'm being what I am. And that's open and honest. We do think of it, though, as a loss of brilliance. One of the things that terrorizes people is that their physical attractiveness begins to move in different directions. And while there are those of us who consider people to be beautiful as people, as long as they're open and shining through regardless of their age, there are those who feel that it's only the high fashion look, or this look, or that look, that is beauty. Coverings. And it's time for us to begin to recognize more and more and more that real brilliance shows through when the diamond of the personality and the many facets of the personality are what they are and are developed and open and pure and clear and clean. We do slow down. We recognize it. And we ought to not only recognize it, but we ought to acknowledge it and not feel guilty about it. If it takes a little more sleep, it takes a little more sleep. If it takes a little more time, it takes a little more time. But that's the way life is. That's the way it's always been, and that's the way it always will be. I think there are a lot of pressures in life, and I think I may be reflecting wrongly at this point, that women face them much more than men do. Partly our fault. We're always teasing. Isn't she a sweet young thing? Don't think I've ever heard a man say, isn't she a sweet old thing? You know? Better not. Yeah. We've got the idea of youth. We have the jokes. You're 40 now, I'll trade you in for two 20-year-olds. When you get 60, maybe three 20-year-olds, but then the guy's bragging, right? But look at what happens. Where have we developed the idea that brilliance is the person, not the facade, except in the church? And even there we have problems. We want people who are attractive, quote unquote. We want people who are physically attractive. How many times have I heard ministers themselves say, I cannot stand ugly people? Believe it or not. I can remember a group of ministers. One individual saying, I hate to call in the hospital where somebody's undergone surgery and are looking ugly or they've got scars. It just turns my stomach. Got to be in the advertising business. Not because the people working in the advertising business don't see these things, they just learn how to cover them up a little better for the cameras. They know how to put the paints on a little better for the cameras. I think that the Christian understanding of the eclipse of life is that one grows in splendor and brilliance, that one is not brilliant and splendiferous when one is 2 years old or 5 years old or 10 years old. That in both men and women, as age comes along and experience and wisdom and understanding There is a growth that far more brilliant than the pure passing of a few years. And when we reflect deep within ourselves, and oh yes, we all like the Playboy image of the sweet young thing, how many of you would want to go back and live through that period again? How many of you would want to return to the 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds and go through it again? How many of you would give up even the painful experiences because of what you've learned from them just to have that fountain of youth? None of us. For in our heart of hearts, we know we're not overshadowed by the coming of years, but truly are growing. I think there's a third definition in this conversation. It's not much of a sermon for a number of reasons, and that's the blocking out of the sun by the moon. I thought of God at this point because oftentimes God, in terms of my own life and in terms of the lives of people we're working with, seems to be blocked out. It happens on numerous occasions. A death in the family and the tragedy of a death will seem to block out God for many people, at least during that period where they're trying to understand certain things. Illness is a beautiful way of blocking out God. When the anger and the fear and the upset, the part of the whole system that each one of us goes through in a period of, I'm not talking about the flu bug that hits you for a couple of days, but a period of a drawn-out illness where there are things happening to us, blocks out God, and God is eclipsed at that particular point. I think there are times when the unfairness of life blocks out God, where frustrations and failures that sometimes are not our own, but are thrown upon us and cast upon us by others, block out God, and the anger within us of the injustice of it all is enough to make God obscure. Each one of us has been through that in our own ways, our own hundreds of ways. We understand it totally. We also understand that certain things happen at that point. In the first place, the fact that God has been blocked out does not mean God is no longer there any more than the fact that the sun has been blocked out removes the sun. One of the things we have to learn in terms of our own godly dimension of life is that oftentimes our lack of seeing God is from our perspective. And the blocking out has nothing to do with the reality of God. The blocking out of friendship has nothing to do with the reality of the other person. It is from my perspective. My perspective is only but one. So I think God is eclipsed on occasion as we struggle with our own lives, but that is not a denial of the reality of God. Secondly, I think that there are times when God is blocked out, but in the blocking out we have two things happening to us. The first is we see things we've never seen before. The brilliance of the sun is such that when you are looking up into the heavens, it obscures many different things. But you will remember, because you've all saw it on television, you will remember that when the sun was totally eclipsed there, you could see certain of the planets more clearly than at any other time. Now, that is not an argument that the eclipse is necessary, but it is an argument that whenever you find God or others in your life eclipsed, you begin to look more clearly for other things. And that part of the positive nature of life, to see the good and to hold on to the good and to learn from even the eclipsing experiences, is to find out that there are other things that you had passed over that are still so important in your lives. I went through it this week with Inez Jordan and her family, and as they came up from Florida and went through the funeral home experience, and as they turned out on Thursday morning, 100 and 150 people to mourn with them. And they did not realize the depth of feeling of so many people who were there. They saw the love and compassion of so many people that they had taken for granted in another situation. But in this eclipsing situation, they learned so much. And I think in life, as we go through the upheavals, and this is what this church is all about, the supporting and the sharing and the giving of love and support and help at times of downness. That when other things are eclipsed, the brilliance of the love of the people of this church shows through. And this is a difficult one. But you will also remember that as this moon moved across in front of the sun, it hit a point where the sun totally gave an aura around the moon. There was a beauty, a uniqueness, a breaking through of the Spirit at that point. And I think in all of our lives that part of what we seek to do, whether we're being overshadowed by a more powerful personality or having one-upsmanship played against us, or brothers or sisters or somebody else trying to show us who's boss, whether we feel we're losing some of our brilliance mentally, physically, or whatever it might be, and are caught up in a Pepsi generation kind of spirit and are concerned about it, whether we find our friends and our relatives are God eclipsed and seem to be far away or not, there is a time when we overcome, when we open ourselves to the true creative spirit within us, and we can recognize that no matter what the difficulty is, we can learn from it, find those who support us, and seek to see that which is beautiful even in the eclipses of life. That which is beautiful even in the blocking out. That which is beautiful even within our own perspective.